Hello everyone, my name is Dan and I make content about competitive Warhammer 40k. This video is going to be a quick one. We're going to be talking about things you should bring to a tournament. We're going to be going over the necessities, things you have to have, things that simplify the game, things that will help you perform and feel better, and then also things that will help you play better. You need dice and tape measures to play a game of Warhammer 40k. Hopefully that isn't a surprise to anyone if you're going to a tournament. You also need all of the rules that your faction has, but you also need any other pertinent rules. I would highly recommend you have the GT tournament pack, the core rulebook, and any FAQ for your army. You don't necessarily have to have them in paper form, but you should have digital access to them. It's important to know that if a rules dispute ever comes up, and you try to say, hey, that rule actually got changed in the FAQ, but you can't actually produce that FAQ for the judge or your opponent, the judge is going to side with your opponent, and that's not their fault. You need to have the rules that your army has. You need a way to be able to score your game. The last thing you want to be doing is trying to figure out if you got grind them down on turn 2 after the game has already ended. You don't need to print off a tournament sheet like this one I found from goonhammer.com, but you should keep track of these somewhere. Another really good resource is the ITC Battles app if you prefer to use your phone. Also, no surprise should be that you need all the models to play your game. These models should be what's called WYSIWYG, or what you see is what you get, meaning the weapons on the models are the weapons they actually have in the game. It can be really confusing for your opponent if you have guys modeled with a bunch of flamers, and then you go and say, oh no, actually these are all melt-a-gun. That can be really frustrating to your opponent, and most tournaments require WYSIWYG. The last thing is plastic glue. The reason why I say this is a necessity is that if one of your models breaks off their base, for example, it can be really hard to determine what the actual line of sight is and things like that. I've seen people actually push around just a base in the middle of a game, and that's also not really fair for your opponent to be able to understand what it sees and what its line of sight is. So you really should bring some glue to fix your models in case they break. The next category is things to simplify your game. On the top left here, I put a bunch of different types of dice. It can be kind of confusing if you're rolling the same dice as a dice you use to put wound counters on your models. You might accidentally pick up one of the dice that's supposed to represent how much damage one of your models has taken, and that can be really frustrating as well because now you don't know how many wounds that thing has taken. So I recommend you bring different colors and types of dice so it can be really easy to see which dice represent wounds, and also to be able to track all the way up. You don't want to have to use 2d6 when you're dealing with a tank's health. Just use a d12. There are some handy gadgets you can get too. This one is from Death Ray Design. You can see that there's some 9-inch templates for Deep Strike Denial, as well as different combat gauges and things like that. You can always use your tape measure to measure these things out, but sometimes it can be kind of wonky and hard to see, especially if you're doing really short distances, and so these game gouges can be really useful in doing those measurements. On the top right, we have the stat cards that Games Workshop sells. So these will have all the different psychic spells and stratagems that your army has. That can be really nice so that you don't actually have to flip through your actual codex. You can just go through these cards if you need to reference a rule really quick. On the bottom right, we have movement trays. This is another thing you really don't need, but it does help simplify your game if you have a lot of models. Now imagine you have 10 units of 10 guardsmen. That can be pretty cumbersome if you're moving one model at a time. I find these movement trays really helpful if you're running a lot of different troops. It's especially helpful if you're playing with a chess clock and you need to be able to move quickly. The last thing you want to be doing is spending most of your time moving 150 models when you can just be moving, 15 different movement trays. So on the bottom left here, we have tokens. These are actually from Privateer Press's game War Machine, but I still like the idea of using these types of things in a game of Warhammer 40k. Sometimes there are many different buffs and debuffs and stratagems on the board at the same time. It can be really hard to know all the different things that are active at once. It's not unheard of if you're playing against 1,000 Suns for them to have like 5 different psychic spells up and a couple different stratagems. It's not really fair to your opponent if you're going to make them remember where every single stratagem and spell is cast without actually helping them at all. It can also lead to some feel-bad moments where your opponent thinks a buff is on one unit, but you actually put it on a different unit, and you had no way of marking it. That can feel pretty frustrating. On top of all that, in the ITC Code of Conduct, you're actually required to mark buffs and different stratagems. I would say most people don't do this, and they really should. Next up is things to perform better. I may get some scoffs when I say this, but going to a Warhammer 40k tournament is very similar to a marathon. Now, what I mean by that is that you're going to be physically active for about 10 to 12 hours. And you need to fuel your body and treat yourself in a way that's going to be conducive to your success. I highly recommend you bring bottled waters. Usually what I'll do is I'll get a whole case of waters, then offer one to my opponent every game. Especially in a lot of these conventions, you might have to be spending $4 for a single bottle of water, or have to walk all the way across a convention hall to get to a water fountain. That's not something you want to have to be dealing with at a tournament. For food, I've got a picture of like nuts and raisins here. I recommend that you eat kind of lower fat foods, a lot of that type of fatty foods and greasy stuff, or like high sugar foods like donuts, for example. That's going to cause you to crash or be really kind of stressful on your stomach as it tries to digest. So I recommend you eat kind of more easily digestible things, imagine like rice or nuts or raisins. If you go pound 2,000 calories of, greasy burgers on your lunch and you can still play well, more props to you. I know I personally would not play at my best. I hear a lot of people say that you shouldn't be drinking caffeine during a tournament because it's going to cause you to crash or cause you to have to pee a lot. I do get that argument, but the issue is many people drink caffeine regularly. And if you drink caffeine regularly like me, you know that if you go too long without caffeine, you'll get a headache and you'll have brain fog. The advice I think that is most accurate is stay true to your normal diet. You don't want to be throwing your body for a loop and eating totally different amounts of caffeine, whether too much or too little, or eating foods that you don't normally eat. They're going to cause you gastrointestinal issues. So for me, generally I'll drink about 100 milligrams of caffeine after lunch. That's kind of like maybe a medium-sized coffee. Next category is things to feel better. Most people don't stand on their feet for 12 hours a day at their job. Now I know obviously there's some nurses and chefs out there that are probably used to that, but a lot of us are office workers or students and we spend a lot of our time sitting. It's very important that you have comfortable shoes, and I think anyone who works in one of those previous careers will tell you that and will have very good suggestions on the type of footwear that you should wear if you're going to be standing your entire day. So here's some unorthodox advice and some unsolicited workout advice. So a lot of people will tell you that their lower back hurts after a long day of gaming. One of the reasons why this happens is that they're constantly leaning forward just a little bit to move their models, and that puts a lot of stress on their lower back. Generally, that pain is made worse because you have tight hamstrings, weak glutes, and weak abs from working in an office all day. It also doesn't help if the day before you were in the car for 4 hours in a row. So my recommendation for you guys is to get resistance bands as well as lacrosse balls. Something as simple as doing some planks, some glute bridges, which you see pictured on the bottom here, and using that lacrosse ball on some of the tighter points on your body is really going to help you feel better. If I'm going to a 2-day tournament, I will bring both of these things to my hotel room, and that way at the end of the night I can do these exercises and it makes me feel much better the next day. Some of us have a little bit more of a forward-leaning center of gravity, if you know what I mean, and that's going to continue to even cause more stress on your back. You're not going to be able to fix that type of acute pain with just some exercise at the end of the day, so I do recommend you bring something like Advil or Tylenol that's going to help not only your back pain, but also any headaches you get if you start feeling down because you're talking all day, you're dehydrated, and your back is getting stressed out. The last thing you want to be doing at a game of Warhammer 40k is worrying about if you stink and if you are the stereotypical gamer. So I just recommend that everyone also brings deodorant, and that way you don't ever feel guilty about if you're smelling really bad or not. A lot of tournaments will have good AC, and you won't be dealing with a whole lot of sweat. But some tournaments, you're going to be very close to a lot of people, and the AC is not going to be working as well as you want. Don't risk it. Just wear deodorant. Hey everyone, this is Dan from the future. I don't think I did a good enough job kind of nailing down that last point, so let me just reiterate. Wear deodorant. Please. Please. Final category is things to play better. It's no surprise if you guys have been watching my channel for a while. I really focus on coming up with a plan for your army before you even get to a game. That means knowing what type of secondaries you're going to be playing against certain armies, as well as knowing what type of CP you're going to spend on what types of stratagems. So I highly recommend you come in with a plan. You're going to kick yourself if you score 0 points on a secondary and then think, dang, I wish I'd spent, just a couple more minutes thinking about it and picked this different secondary. I would have done so much better in that game. Next thing to bring is a growth mindset. I think this is worthy of an entire video, But it's very important that you go into every tournament with this idea that you are able to develop and get better and better through playing games. Every tournament you go to is a chance for you to learn, practice against different armies and players, meet other people, and overall become a better player of Warhammer 40k. Whether you win the tournament or not, that should not determine your self-worth. You should find value in going to a tournament beyond simply winning. Take every game as an opportunity to make new friends and learn your army better. And the final thing I have here is a game guide. I found an example of this on Reddit, so I'll link that below if you guys would like to see it. But it can be hard to memorize all the different rules in a game. But the last thing you want to be doing in a tournament game is flipping through a rulebook to figure out what defensible means, or what's the range of that pistol on your Space Marine captain. A lot of these things you can put into a little guide on a one-sheeter beforehand. If you know you constantly forget something, like maybe gaining a CP every command phase, put it on a note card so it reminds you every single time. As you go through different phases, maybe do a finger drag and actually look, hey, did I get 1 CP? Did I do my command phase abilities? I highly recommend you bring one of these guides that's tailored to your specific needs. If you have any other ideas, please put them in the comments below, things that really helped you at a tournament, or join my Discord via Patreon and we can talk about improving as Warhammer 40k players in many other different ways. I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you for stopping by.